After years of sacrifice, a mother finally believed she had found peace living with her son. But behind her daughter-in-law's smiles, a cruel cycle of humiliation and silent violence was hidden. When the truth finally came to light, it was too late for comfort, but not for justice. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The fine September rain was wetting the streets of London when Mrs. Helen stepped out of the taxi in front of the luxury apartment complex. Her tired eyes contemplated the imposing building, all mirrored glass, so different from the simple little house where she had spent the last 20 years. The driver helped with her luggage, few bags for a lifetime, and she thanked him with the kindness of someone who had never lost her manners, even on the hardest days. She took a deep breath, smelling the big city mixed with the dampness of the drizzle, and walked to the doorman's desk. The doorman greeted her formally, checking her name on the visitor list before allowing entry. Mrs. Helen smiled shyly, still getting used to the idea that this place would now be her home. She entered the mirrored elevator and saw her reflection multiplied on the walls. A 72-year-old woman, grey hair tied in a bun, wrinkles that told stories of sleepless nights and days of struggle. But at that moment, her eyes shone with something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. When the elevator doors opened on the 14th floor, there was Robert, her son, with that wide smile she had known since he was a child. 38 years. Old dark hair neatly combed, impeccable navy blue suit, success stamped in every detail. He hugged her tightly, and Mrs. Helen felt her chest tighten with emotion. How many times had she dreamed of this moment? How many nights had she prayed for her son to prosper and live without the difficulties she had known? "Welcome, Mum. You're finally home," Robert said, taking her bags and guiding her into the apartment. The place was everything she imagined and more. Spacious, with light marble floors, tasteful modern furniture, abstract paintings on the walls, a huge balcony with a view of the city. Natural light poured generously through the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating an atmosphere of tranquility. Mrs. Helen stood there, absorbing every detail, still not quite believing it was real. It was then that Christina appeared. She emerged from the hallway like an apparition, wearing an elegant beige linen outfit, her straight blonde hair shining under the light, perfect makeup, an impeccable smile. She was tall, slender, with that upright posture of someone who had attended good schools and better social circles. At 35, Christina was the kind of woman who commanded attention wherever she went, not just for her beauty, but for her striking presence. "Mrs. Helen, what a joy to meet you in person," Christina said, extending her hand delicately. "Robert talks about you so much that I feel like I've known you for years. Welcome to our home." The handshake was firm but gentle, and Mrs. Helen immediately felt welcomed. "Thank you, my dear, thank you so much. I don't even know how to thank you for welcoming me like this." "Oh, it's nothing. The house is yours too now," Christina replied, with that melodious voice that sounded like it came from a television commercial. "Come, I'll show you. Your room. We prepared everything with great care." The room prepared for Mrs. Helen was at the end of the corridor, an airy space with a west-facing window, a new double bed with a floral bedspread, a spacious wardrobe, a comfortable armchair next to a bookshelf full of books. There was even a reading lamp and soft curtains that filtered the afternoon light. Christina opened the drawers to show that they were already lined with scented paper, pointed out the private bathroom with perfectly folded soft towels. "I hope you like it. If you need to change anything, just say so," Christina said, lightly touching Mrs. Helen's shoulder in a maternal gesture. "It's perfect, my dear." "More than perfect," the elderly woman replied, her eyes welling up. "I never imagined I'd have a room like this." Robert entered, carrying the bags, and placed them next to the wardrobe. "Mum deserves all this and much more, Mum. You raised me alone, worked so hard, sacrificed everything for me. Now it's my turn to give back. You can rest easy. You're home." The first few weeks were a period of sweet adjustment. Mrs. Helen woke up early, as she always had her whole life, but now she didn't have to rush out for a cleaning job. She could have breakfast calmly at the huge kitchen table, watching the city wake up through the windows. Christina always appeared impeccable even in the morning, preparing fresh coffee, toast with jam, meticulously cut fruit. They chatted about pleasantries, recipes, soap operas, while Robert read the news on his tablet before leaving for the office. Mrs. Helen began to establish a routine. In the morning, after Robert left, she helped Christina with small household tasks, even though Nora, the housekeeper who had worked there for 5 years, was present. Nora was a black woman in her early 40s, always in an impeccable uniform, efficient and discreet. Initially, Mrs. Helen felt a certain embarrassment. She had never been served in her life. She had always been the one cleaning other people's houses. But Nora treated her with genuine respect, and gradually they developed a cordial relationship. In the afternoon, Mrs. Helen liked to sit on the balcony with a book or simply observe the city's movement below. She had an old portable radio she had brought from home, and she would listen to her favorite old songs, softly, those tunes that reminded her of her youth. Christina always appeared with tea, a biscuit, a kind word. She would ask if everything was all right, if she needed anything, if the room was comfortable. When Robert returned from work, usually in the late afternoon, they all had dinner together. Christina was an excellent cook, or at least she knew how to delegate tasks very well to Nora, resulting in delicious and well-presented meals. The table was always carefully set, with cloth napkins, crystal glasses, porcelain plates. They talked about their day. Robert would recount meetings, successful business deals, and plans for the company's expansion. Mrs. Helen listened to everything with pride clearly visible on her face. Her boy, whom she had raised alone after her husband passed away so early, a victim of a sudden illness when Robert was just 6 years old. Those were difficult years, working in 3 different houses, coming home late at night, waking up before sunrise. But it had all been worth it. There he was, successful, married to a wonderful woman, offering her the comfort she had never had. One evening, after a particularly pleasant dinner, Robert held his mother's hand and said, with emotion in his voice, "You know, Mum, when I was little and saw you coming home tired, your hands sore from scrubbing other people's floors, I promised myself that one day I would change that one day you would live like a queen, without having to worry about anything." Mrs. Helen squeezed her son's hand, tears streaming freely. "You were always a good boy, Robert, always, and look where you've come. I'm so proud." Christina observed the scene with a sweet smile, but if anyone had paid close attention, they would have noticed that the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. But no one noticed. The soft light of the crystal chandelier, the cozy atmosphere, the moment of tenderness between mother and son, all conspired to create an atmosphere of perfect family harmony. The days followed in a peaceful rhythm. Mrs. Helen gradually got used to her new life, to the comfort that had once only been a dream. She began to explore the apartment more, to truly feel at home. She reorganized some things in her room, placed old photographs on the shelf, small objects she had brought with her. Christina always praised her choices, helped her find the best place for each memory. It was at the end of the 3rd week that Mrs. Helen noticed the first subtle change. She was in the kitchen, preparing a cornmeal cake, just as she used to do when Robert was a child. It was Saturday morning. Robert had left early to play tennis with some work friends. Nora had the weekends off. Christina entered the kitchen, still in her silk robe, and observed for a moment. "Good morning, my dear. I'm making that cake Robert has loved since he was little," Mrs. Helen said, smiling. "How lovely, Mrs. Helen. But did you know we have an excellent bakery nearby? They make wonderful cakes, always fresh," Christina replied, picking up a cup of coffee. "Oh, but this one is special. It's my grandmother's recipe. I passed it on to Robert when he was little. He loves it." Christina took a sip of her coffee, her eyes fixed on her mother-in-law. "I understand. But perhaps it would be better to ask before using the kitchen, you know? I have an organization system here, and sometimes when someone moves things around it gets all messy." Mrs. Helen blinked, surprised. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Can I finish the cake? It's almost ready." Yes, but next time it's better to arrange it beforehand, all right?" Christina's voice maintained its sweet tone, but there was something different there, something Mrs. Helen couldn't quite identify. "Of course, my dear, I'm really sorry," the elderly woman replied, returning to stir the batter with less enthusiasm than before. Christina left the kitchen, and Mrs. Helen remained there, alone, feeling a small pang of discomfort that she tried to ignore. It was just a matter of organization, after all. Christina was right. The house had its rules. It was normal. She was a guest here. She needed to adapt. The cake was ready, fragrant and golden as always. When Robert returned from tennis, sweaty and excited, he found his mother in the living room and went straight to hug her. "I smell cornmeal cake. You made my favorite cake." "Yes, I did, my son. It's cooling in the kitchen." Robert went to get a slice, came back chewing with satisfaction. "It's perfect, Mum. Just like the one you used to make when I was little. No one makes cake like you." Christina appeared in the living room, already dressed, made up, perfect as always. "It was delicious, Mrs. Helen. Robert, can you help me organize the kitchen later? It got a bit messy." Robert nodded, not giving it much importance. "Of course, darling. We'll tidy it up later." But Mrs. Helen felt that pang again. Had she really left the kitchen so messy? She had always been careful, organized. She had spent her life cleaning houses. She knew how to keep everything in its place. But perhaps Christina's standards were different. A refined woman, accustomed to another level of perfection. In the following days, small incidents began to accumulate. Mrs. Helen went to make tea in the afternoon, and Christina commented that that mug was not for daily use. It was part of a special set. Mrs. Helen wanted to water the plants on the balcony, and Christina explained that each plant had a specific time and an exact amount of water. Mrs. Helen left the portable radio on in her room, and Christina knocked on the door saying the sound was bothering her, even though it was almost inaudible. Always with kindness, always with a smile, Christina was establishing limits, creating rules, pointing out errors. And Mrs. Helen, wanting to be the perfect mother-in-law, the grateful guest, retreated more and more. She began to be afraid to touch things, to take up space, to bother. One afternoon, while Nora was cleaning the living room, Mrs. Helen commented softly, "Nora, could you show me where things are kept in the kitchen? That way I won't risk picking up anything wrong." Nora looked at her with an expression that Mrs. Helen couldn't quite decipher. Was there compassion there, perhaps? Or concern? "Of course, Mrs. Helen, I'll show you everything, but you don't need to worry so much. The house is big, there's room for everyone. It's just that I don't want to cause trouble, you know? Christina is so organized, so perfect. I don't want to spoil anything." Nora was silent for a moment, as if wanting to say something but holding back. Then she smiled and said, "You are Dr. Robert's mother. You have every right to be here and to feel at home." Those words warmed Mrs. Helen's heart, but did not completely dissipate the discomfort that was growing, slowly, silent as a plant growing in the shade. At night, in bed, Mrs. Helen lay, awake, thinking. Was she being ungrateful? Christina and Robert offered her everything, a beautiful home, comfort, security, and she was there complaining about small things, about silly details. Maybe it was just a matter of time, of adaptation. New houses have their rules, new people have their ways. She needed to be patient, understanding, grateful. But deep down, very deep down, a little voice kept whispering that something wasn't right, that Christina's eyes, behind that perfect smile, held something different, something cold, something that watched, calculated, waited. Mrs. Helen brushed these thoughts away as if they were annoying flies. She couldn't think like that. Christina was her son's wife, the woman he had chosen to build a life with. She should be a good mother-in-law, understanding, one who didn't interfere, who didn't cause problems. How many times had she heard stories of terrible mothers-in-law who ruined marriages? She wouldn't be one of them. Never. So she swallowed the discomfort, forced a smile, said yes to everything, occupied less and less space, spoke softer and softer, existed less and less, and little by little, without fully realizing what was happening, Mrs. Helen began to disappear within her own skin. Like an old photograph that gradually loses its colors over time until it becomes just a pale sketch of what it once was. Robert noticed nothing. He came home tired from work, had dinner, chatted a little, watched television with Christina, and went to sleep. On weekends, he had social engagements, dinners with clients, lunches with business partners. Christina always accompanied him, impeccable, the perfect wife everyone admired. And Mrs. Helen stayed home, quiet, occupying her little corner, reading her books, listening to her small radio at the lowest possible volume, practically non-existent. One evening, after another dinner where Christina had discreetly corrected the way Mrs. Helen held her fork, the elderly woman locked herself in the bathroom and looked at her reflection in the mirror. Who was that woman there? That elderly lady with slumped shoulders, a fleeting gaze, who seemed to apologize for existing. Where was the Helen who had raised a son alone, who had worked hard her whole life, who had faced storms and survived? She touched her own face with trembling fingers. When had she started to feel this way? When had she stopped being a person and become a piece of furniture occupying space in someone else's living room? But before she could answer herself, she heard Christina's voice from outside. "Mrs. Helen, are you all right in there? You've been in the bathroom for a while." "Yes, my dear. I'm coming out now," she replied quickly, drying her face with the towel. She opened the door and found Christina there, smiling, beautiful as always. "I was worried. Are you feeling well?" "I'm fine. I was just washing my face." "That's good. I came to tell you that tomorrow I'm going to change the house routine a bit. I need to reorganize some things. Maybe it would be better for you to stay in your room more so you don't get in the way. Is that all right?" Mrs. Helen blinked. "Of course, my dear. That's fine." "Great. Good night then," Christina said, lightly touching her mother-in-law's arm before walking away. And Mrs. Helen returned to her room, that space that was slowly ceasing to be a refuge and becoming a voluntary prison. She lay on the bed, looking at the ceiling, feeling a weight in her chest that she couldn't name. Outside, through the window, the city of London shone with millions of lights, pulsed with life, with movement, with possibilities. But inside, in that beautiful room in a luxurious apartment, Mrs. Helen felt more alone than she ever had in her life. And so another day ended, another brick being laid in the invisible wall that was rising around her, silent and relentless like passing time. The second month in Robert's house brought changes that Mrs. Helen could no longer ignore, no matter how hard she tried. The rules multiplied like weeds in an abandoned garden, growing fast, occupying all available space, suffocating what was alive there. Christina now corrected practically everything, always with that smile. That didn't reach her eyes, always with a voice that mixed sweetness with something sharp like a blade hidden in velvet. "You shouldn't use that hairbrush in the guest bathroom, Mrs. Helen. It's for visitors. Use the one in your own bathroom." Or, "I noticed you were on the balcony this morning. It would be better to go in the afternoon when I finish organizing the plants." Or even, "These clothes would be better stored this way. See how I do it." Each sentence was a small correction, a small adjustment, a small demonstration that Mrs. Helen was always doing something wrong. And the worst part was that the elderly woman began to believe it. She started to see herself through Christina's eyes as someone clumsy, outdated, who didn't understand the rules of the modern world. After all, what did she know about luxury apartments? She had spent her life in simple houses working for others. Perhaps Christina was right. Perhaps she really needed to learn to live in that new world. Robert remained oblivious to everything. He left early, came back late, always involved with business expansion. When he was home, Christina was the perfect wife, attentive to him and kind to her mother-in-law. She made a point of serving Mrs. Helen's dinner with a smile, asking if she liked the food, offering dessert. Robert observed this with satisfaction, proud of the harmony he believed existed in his home. One Thursday morning, Mrs. Helen woke up wanting to make that special breakfast Robert loved as a child. Fresh cheese bread, tapioca with coconut, freshly squeezed orange juice. She got up early, even before Christina woke up, and went silently to the kitchen. She began to work carefully, trying not to make noise, not to disturb. She was just flipping the tapioca in the pan when she felt a presence behind her. She turned and found herself face to face with Christina, in a silk nightgown, hair down, eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Good morning, my dear. I'm making a special breakfast for Robert. It will be ready soon," Mrs. Helen said, trying to smile. Christina didn't answer immediately. She walked to the sink, took a glass of water, drank slowly, her eyes never leaving her mother-in-law. The silence stretched heavy, threatening. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, lower, without any trace of sweetness. "Mrs. Helen, I think we need to talk. Sit here." It wasn't a request, it was an order. Mrs. Helen turned off the stove and sat on the stool next to the counter, her hands trembling slightly. Christina stood, dominating the space, her gaze cold as ice. "I have been very patient with you, very patient indeed. I opened my home, shared my husband, tried to make everything work. But you don't cooperate. You mess with my things. You mess up my kitchen. You occupy my spaces. I need you to understand once and for all, I am in charge here. This is my house. Robert is my husband, and you are here because I allow it." Mrs. Helen felt her blood run cold in her veins. "But I just wanted to make a special breakfast for Robert. He likes it so much." "It doesn't matter what he likes. What matters is that you need to learn your place. And your place is not this kitchen in the early morning. It's not making decisions without consulting me. It's not acting as if you own the house." Christina moved closer, invading Mrs. Helen's personal space, who instinctively recoiled on the stool. "I'm sorry, Christina, I didn't mean to disrespect you. I just wanted to make a surprise for my son." "Your son? Our husband is different from your son now. He has a wife, a life, commitments. You are his past, I am his present and his future. It would be good if that were clear." At that moment, something broke inside Mrs. Helen. It wasn't just the fear she felt, it was something deeper, more devastating. It was the sudden realization that she had made a terrible mistake by coming to this house, that this woman, so gentle in front of Robert, was a completely different person when they were alone. Christina saw Mrs. Helen's expression and smiled, but it was no longer that false smile from before. It was a smile of triumph, of someone who knew they had won. "Excellent. I see we understand each other. Now clean up this mess and go back to your room. I'll prepare breakfast for my husband." Mrs. Helen stood up on trembling legs, put away the ingredients, cleaned the kitchen in silence, feeling Christina's gaze on her like a physical weight. When she finished, she returned to her room and closed the door. She sat on the bed and stayed there, motionless, trying to process what had just happened. Minutes later, she heard Robert waking up, his cheerful voice greeting Christina, the sound of him having breakfast in the kitchen. Then the apartment door closing as he left for work. And then the silence. That terrible silence that Mrs. Helen would soon learn to fear more than anything. From that day on, everything rapidly worsened. Christina no longer needed to pretend all the time. The masks fell, at least when they were alone. She began to give direct orders without any disguise of kindness. "Mrs. Helen, stay in your room. I need to receive visitors. Mrs. Helen, turn off that radio. The noise bothers me. Mrs. Helen, use the service stairs when you leave. I don't want the neighbors to see you in the main elevator." Each order was accompanied by a look that left no room for disobedience, and Mrs. Helen obeyed because she didn't know what else to do. She thought about telling Robert, but how? How to explain that his wife, that adorable woman he loved, was actually a cruel and controlling person? Would he believe it? Or would he think his mother was jealous, trying to cause problems in his marriage? Moreover, Christina was clever, very clever. Whenever Robert was present, she reverted to being the perfect daughter-in-law. She brought tea to her mother-in-law, asked if everything was all right, praised the old embroideries Mrs. Helen kept from her grandmother. Robert saw this and felt proud, satisfied to have a wife so attentive to his mother. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, when Robert was on a business trip to Manchester, that things took an even darker turn. Mrs. Helen was in the living room reading a book when Christina arrived with a pile of papers. "I need you to sign some documents," Christina said, placing the papers on the coffee table. Mrs. Helen picked up the sheets and began to read. They were complex documents, full of legal terms she didn't fully understand. "What is this, my dear?" "They're just formalities. Documents that prove you're living here legally, that you have guaranteed medical assistance, things like that. Robert asked me to arrange it, but Mrs. Helen, even with little formal education, had a keen instinct for life. Something about those papers didn't seem right. I don't know, Christina. I think it's better to wait for Robert to come back before I sign. I want him to explain it properly. Christina's face transformed. The mask of civility completely fell, revealing something that made Mrs. Helen shrink back on the sofa. You are going to sign these papers now. It is not a request. I won't sign anything without knowing what it is, Mrs. Helen replied, trying to keep her voice firm despite the fear she felt. Christina took 2 steps towards her, her eyes flashing with anger. Do you really think you have a choice? Do you think you can defy me? I can make your life a living hell in this house. I can make Robert believe that you're losing your mind, that you need to be institutionalized. Who do you think he'll believe, me or a confused old woman? Mrs. Helen felt tears burn her eyes but refused to let them fall. I'm not confused, and I won't sign. What happened next was quick. Christina grabbed Mrs. Helen's arm tightly, her sharp nails digging into the elderly woman's thin skin. The pain was intense, immediate. Mrs. Helen tried to break free, but Christina was younger, stronger. You will sign, yes, you will do exactly what I tell you, because if you don't, you'll regret it. Understood? Mrs. Helen nodded, tears now streaming freely down her face. Christina released her, pushing her back onto the sofa. Excellent. I see we've reached an understanding. But before she could finish her sentence, the utility room door opened and Nora appeared, carrying cleaning products. She stopped halfway, her eyes going from Christina to Mrs. Helen. She saw the tears on the elderly woman's face. She saw the red marks on her arm. She saw the guilty expression on Christina's face, who quickly tried to compose herself. Nora, I didn't know you were here, Christina said, her voice returning to a controlled tone. I forgot a product yesterday, Mrs. Christina. I came to get it, Nora replied, without taking her eyes off Mrs. Helen. Christina grabbed the papers from the table and quickly left the room, leaving the 2 women alone. Nora slowly approached Mrs. Helen. Are you all right? Mrs. Helen nodded yes, but the gesture convinced no one. Nora sat beside her on the sofa. Mrs. Helen, I see things. I see what happens here. If you need help. I don't need anything, Nora. Everything's fine, Mrs. Helen interrupted, quickly wiping her face. I just lost my balance, and Christina held my arm so I wouldn't fall. That's all. Nora looked at the marks on Mrs. Helen's arm, clearly caused by fingers that squeezed hard with intent. She said nothing, but her gaze said everything. Mrs. Helen, if you change your mind, I'm here, and I know people who can help. Thank you, Nora, but really everything's fine. Nora stood up, picked up the product she had come for, but before leaving turned to Mrs. Helen once more. Dr. Robert needs to know what's happening in his house. He's a good man, but he's blind. I can't do that to him, Nora. He loves Christina. I can't destroy his marriage because I can't adapt. This isn't about adaptation, Mrs. Helen. This is about survival. And she left, leaving Mrs. Helen alone with those words that echoed in the empty room. Survival. When had her life come down to that? When had she stopped living to merely survive? That night, Robert returned from his trip animated, full of news about new contracts closed. Christina greeted him with kisses and hugs, prepared his favorite dinner, told funny stories about her day. Mrs. Helen dined in silence, her long sleeves hiding the marks on her arms, smiling when necessary, responding when asked, but basically invisible. After dinner, when Robert went to take a shower, Christina approached Mrs. Helen in the kitchen. See how it works. He doesn't notice anything. And you know why? Because he doesn't want to notice. It's easier to believe everything is perfect than to face the truth. Mrs. Helen didn't respond, just continued drying the dishes Nora had washed before leaving. Christina laughed softly, a humorless sound. You're smart about one thing, I'll admit. You know how to keep your mouth shut. Keep it up and maybe we can get along. The following days were an exercise in silent terror. Christina established new rules. Mrs. Helen could no longer leave the apartment without permission. She couldn't answer the landline phone. She couldn't open the door to anyone. She couldn't use the main elevator. Her room could no longer be locked because, according to Christina, in case of emergency they needed quick access. And the marks began to accumulate. They weren't serious injuries, nothing that would draw much attention. A bruise here, a scratch there, a finger mark over there, always in places that could be covered by clothes, always accompanied by low threats, whispered when Robert wasn't around. If you tell him, it will be worse. If you try to leave, I'll say you're having mental problems. If you scream, no one will hear and you'll pay dearly later. Mrs. Helen withdrew more and more into herself. She stopped reading in the living room, spent most of the day locked in her room. She stopped talking at dinner, only listened. She stopped smiling, merely existing, like a ghost inhabiting a body that no longer completely belonged to her. Nora watched everything with a heavy heart. She saw Mrs. Helen's transformation. She saw the signs of abuse that any attentive person would notice. But she also saw that the elderly woman didn't want help, or rather couldn't ask for help. Fear had deep roots now, encompassing every thought, every action. One afternoon, when Christina left for the beauty salon, Nora went to Mrs. Helen's room. She knocked softly on the door. "Can you open, please?" Mrs. Helen opened it, her eyes red from crying. Nora entered and closed the door behind her. "Mrs. Helen, you need to react. This cannot continue." "What can I do, Nora? He's my son, my only son. If I tell him the truth, he might not believe me. He might think I'm the one causing problems. And if he believes it, his marriage will end. How can I do that to him? And how can you let them do this to you?" Nora sat on the bed next to Mrs. Helen. "I know you love Dr. Robert, but he wouldn't be happy if he knew you were suffering like this. He didn't marry Mrs. Christina so his mother would become a prisoner in her own home." "I'm not a prisoner," Mrs. Helen replied, but the lie was too obvious even for her to believe. "Yes, you are. And with each passing day, the bars get tighter. I've worked here for 5 years, Mrs. Helen. I've seen a lot. Mrs. Christina has always been controlling, always had to have everything her way, but I've never seen her do what she's doing to you. And you know why? Because she's jealous. Jealous of the love Dr. Robert has for his mother. She wants to be the only important person in his life." Mrs. Helen wiped her tears. "But what can I do, Nora? How can I prove what she does when we're alone? It's my word against hers." Nora was thoughtful for a moment. Then she said, "Leave it to me. I'll find a way for Dr. Robert to discover the truth. But you have to promise me one thing. Don't give up. Don't let her destroy who you are." "I don't know if I even know who I am anymore," Mrs. Helen whispered. "I know. You are the strong woman who raised a son alone, who worked her whole life without complaining, who deserves respect and dignity. That person is still in there. You just need to remember that." When Nora left the room, she left behind a small seed of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in that moment of deep darkness, even the smallest light made a difference. That night during dinner, Robert noticed something different for the first time. "Mum, are you all right? You've been very quiet lately." Mrs. Helen was about to open her mouth to answer, but Christina anticipated her. "Your mother is fine. Darling, just a little tired, aren't you, Mrs. Helen? Age weighs heavily, it's natural." "Yes, I'm just a little tired," Mrs. Helen confirmed, looking at her plate. Robert seemed to accept the explanation, but something in his eyes showed a hint of concern. "Perhaps we should arrange a medical checkup for you, Mum. It's been a while since you've seen a doctor." Mrs. Helen was about to respond, but again Christina anticipated her. "Excellent idea, darling. I'll make an appointment for her myself next week. I know an excellent doctor, a geriatrician, very competent." When Christina said that, Mrs. Helen felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew exactly what that meant. Another form of control. Another way for Christina to have power over her. She imagined her daughter-in-law inventing symptoms, suggesting medications, perhaps even institutionalization. The net was closing in even tighter. That night Mrs. Helen lay in bed, unable to sleep. She looked at the ceiling, listening to the city noises outside, and thought about how her life had taken such an unexpected turn. 2 months ago she was full of hope, happy to finally have a real home with her son. Now she felt more imprisoned than when she lived alone in her simple little house. But Nora was right. She couldn't give up. Somewhere deep inside her, the warrior Helen still existed, the one who faced the world alone and won. She needed to find that woman again. She needed to survive until someone somehow saw the truth, and she hoped that someone would be Robert before it was too late. Nora spent the following days observing, thinking, planning. She knew she had to be careful, strategic. She couldn't simply tell Robert what she saw because Christina would deny everything and then make Mrs. Helen pay dearly for the betrayal. She needed something concrete, something that would make Robert see with his own eyes what was happening in that house when he wasn't present. The opportunity arose on a Friday morning. Robert mentioned during breakfast that he would have an important meeting at 9 in the morning that could last all day. Christina smiled, said she would take advantage of it to go to the spa with her friends, a full day of treatments she had scheduled weeks ago. Nora heard everything from the kitchen while preparing fresh juice, and that's when the idea took shape in her mind. "Mrs. Christina, can I leave early today? I need to sort out some things at the bank," Nora said after Robert left. Christina looked at her with that calculating gaze. "What time do you plan to leave?" "Around 10 o'clock, if you don't mind." "All right, but be back to normal on Monday. You're off today and the weekend." Nora thanked her and returned to her tasks, but her mind was already working on the plan. She left the apartment at 10, as agreed, but didn't go home. She watched from a distance, waiting. She saw Christina leave shortly after, all dressed up, getting into a ride-sharing car. She waited a few more minutes to be sure, then discreetly returned to the building. The doorman greeted her, surprised. "Forgot something, Nora?" "Yes, Mr. Gerald. The key to the cleaning supplies cabinet. Mrs. Christina will need it later. Can I go up quickly?" "Of course, you can go up." Nora went up to the apartment and used her key to enter silently. She found Mrs. Helen in her room, sitting in the armchair, staring into space. When she saw Nora, she was startled. "I thought you had left?" "I came here because I need you to trust me," Nora said, closing the bedroom door. "I need you to show me the marks." Mrs. Helen instinctively pulled down her sleeves. "What marks?" "Mrs. Helen, please, I know what's happening. Let me see." After a moment of hesitation, Mrs. Helen slowly raised her sleeves. Her arms were covered in marks at various stages of healing, yellowish bruises, more recent red marks, thin scratches like lines drawn by nails. Nora felt her stomach churn, but maintained a controlled expression. She needed to be strong for this woman who was already so broken. "You're going to do me a favor. You're going to let me take pictures of this. Afterwards, you're going to write a note for Dr. Robert, a note that I'll leave in his office." "I can't do that, Nora. If Christina finds out," "She won't find out. And even if she does, it won't matter. Because Dr. Robert needs to know. He has the right to know what's happening to his mother." Mrs. Helen remained silent, tears streaming down her face. Nora gently took her hand. "You've suffered enough. It's time for someone to fight for you, since you can't fight for yourself right now. Let me do this." After a long moment, Mrs. Helen nodded. Nora took out her phone and carefully photographed each mark, each bruise. Then she took paper and a pen and asked Mrs. Helen to write a note. "You don't need to tell him everything, just give him a sign, a warning. Let him discover the rest himself." With trembling hands, Mrs. Helen wrote, "Robert, my dear son, if one day you notice something strange, look closely at your mother's arms. Not everything is as it seems in this house. With love, your mother who has always loved you." Nora took the note and carefully put it away. Then she helped Mrs. Helen compose herself, dried her tears, adjusted her sleeves. "Now you'll continue your normal routine. Don't give any sign that we did this. And when Dr. Robert finds out, and he will, you'll be safe, I promise. But what about you, Nora? Christina will know it was you." Nora smiled, a sad but determined smile. "I've worked in this house for 5 years. I've watched this boy grow up. I've seen him become the man he is today. I won't let his mother suffer like this without doing anything. And if I lose my job, I'll sleep in peace knowing I did the right thing." After that, Nora quietly went down to Robert's office in the apartment. It was a room Christina rarely entered, his personal space where he kept important documents. Nora carefully placed the note on the desk, in a place where Robert would certainly see it, but not so obvious that it seemed intentional. Having done that, she left the apartment and really went home, her heart pounding in her chest. She had started something irreversible. Now it was a matter of time. Robert returned home around 7 in the evening, tired but satisfied. The meeting had been productive. He had closed an important contract. Christina greeted him radiantly, smelling of expensive spa products, her skin glowing, her hair perfectly styled. She kissed her husband at length, prepared drinks, said she would order Japanese food, his favorite. During dinner, Robert mentioned that he would need to work a bit on the new contract documents. "Darling, I'll be in the office for an hour after dinner, all right?" "Of course, my love. Take your time and work peacefully. I'll watch." A movie in the living room. Robert went up to his office, turned on his computer, and began to organize the papers. That's when he saw the note. He frowned, picked up the sheet of paper, immediately recognizing his mother's handwriting. He read it once, then read it again slowly, letting each word penetrate his brain. "Look closely at your mother's arms. Not everything is as it seems in this house." He stood there, the note in his hands, a strange sensation taking hold of his chest. Why would his mother write something like that? What was she trying to say? He remembered the past few weeks, how she had become increasingly quiet, withdrawn. He had attributed it to age, tiredness, adaptation. But what if it was something else? He got up from the chair and went to his mother's room. He knocked softly on the door. "Mum, can I come in?" "Yes, my son," Mrs. Helen's weak voice replied. He entered and found her sitting on the bed, again in those long-sleeved clothes, even though it was warm. "Mum, we need to talk." "About what, son?" Robert sat beside her, holding the note. "I found this in my office. It's yours, isn't it?" Mrs. Helen looked at the note and paled. I don't know how that got there." "Mum, please, don't lie to me. What's happening here? Why did you write this?" Mrs. Helen began to tremble. "It's nothing, son. Forget about it." But Robert was no longer the blind man he had been until that moment. Something had changed. The concern he had been pushing to the back of his mind now exploded into urgency. "Mum, show me your arms." "What?" "No, son. Everything's fine." "Please, Mum, show me your arms." With tears in her eyes, lacking the strength to resist any longer, Mrs. Helen slowly raised her sleeves. Robert saw the marks and felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Marks at various stages of healing, bruises, scratches, clear signs of aggression. "My God, Mum, who did this to you?" Mrs. Helen shook her head, sobbing. "I can't say, son, I can't." But Robert already knew. All the pieces suddenly fit together, like a macabre puzzle he had refused to see until that moment. The long-sleeved clothes, the withdrawal, the silence, the fear in his mother's eyes. And the only person who was alone with her during the day was Christina. It was her, wasn't it? "Christina did this to you. Robert, son, please don't do anything. She's your wife. You love her. I don't want to destroy your marriage." "She hurt my mother. How do you expect me to do nothing?" At that moment they heard Christina's voice from the hallway. "Darling, is everything all right in there? I heard voices." Robert stood up, his fists clenched, his face red with contained anger. "Stay here, Mum, and lock the door." He left the room and closed the door behind him, finding Christina in the hallway with that smile that now seemed repulsive to him. "We need to talk, now." Christina saw something different in her husband's eyes, something that made her instinctively take a step back. "What is it, darling? Did something happen?" "You're going to tell me exactly what you've been doing to my mother." "I don't know what you're talking about." Robert took a step towards her, and for the first time in their 5 years of marriage, Christina saw fear reflected in her own eyes. "I saw the marks on her arms, marks that weren't there when she arrived here. Marks that could only have been made by you." Christina tried to regain her composure, reverting to her usual sweet and controlled voice. "Darling, your mother is confused. She's been stumbling, hurting herself. I even tried to talk to you about it, remember? That she was becoming forgetful. Don't lie to me. I saw the finger marks, Christina. I saw the scratches. This isn't from falls. This is from assault." Christina's mask began to crack. "You don't understand. She was getting in the way of everything, always meddling, always wanting attention, always interfering in our lives. I tried to be. Stay patient, I swear I did. But she wouldn't stop." Robert couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You assaulted my mother because she was getting in the way. You're sick, Christina. You need help." "I'm not sick. I just wanted my husband to myself, our home in peace. But she was always there, always between us. She's my mother. The woman who raised me alone, who worked her fingers to the bone so I could have a better life. And you thought you had the right to hurt her." Christina realized she had lost. She saw in Robert's eyes something she had never seen before, a firmness, a determination that left no room for manipulation. She tried one last card. "Darling, please, I can change. Let's talk. Let's resolve this as a family. There's no need to turn this into a drama." "There will be no talk, Christina. This is over. I'm calling the authorities." "You won't do that," Christina screamed, completely losing control. "You're destroying our marriage because of an old woman who shouldn't even be here." "That old woman is my mother, and yes, I will do this." Robert took out his phone and dialed. Christina tried to snatch the phone from his hand, but he pushed her away firmly. The call connected, and he reported the situation in a controlled but firm voice, asking for someone to be sent immediately. While they waited, Robert returned to his mother's room. Mrs. Helen was sitting on the bed, trembling, hugging herself. He sat beside her and hugged her carefully, as if she were made of crystal. "I'm so sorry, Mum. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I let this happen." "It wasn't your fault, son. You didn't know." "I should have known. I should have paid more attention. I should have noticed the signs. But I promise I will protect you now. No one will hurt you again." Mrs. Helen cried in her son's arms, years of pain and fear finally finding release. Outside, they heard Christina screaming, defending herself, trying to justify the unjustifiable. But nothing she said mattered anymore. The truth had been revealed, and there was no turning back. Half an hour later, the authorities arrived. 2 police officers, a woman and a man, both with serious but kind expressions. Robert received them, explained the situation, and showed them the marks on his mother's arms. The officers listened attentively, took notes, and photographed the injuries. Christina tried to argue, saying that everything was a misunderstanding, that Mrs. Helen was confused, that she had memory problems. But when the officers saw the marks and heard Robert's account, there was no doubt. The law was clear in such cases, and Christina would be taken in for questioning. "You can't do this to me. I didn't do anything," Christina screamed as she was escorted out of the apartment. "Robert, tell them. You know me. You know I wouldn't do such a thing." But Robert said nothing. He simply watched arm in arm with his mother, as the woman he thought he knew revealed herself to be a complete stranger. A stranger capable of causing pain to a defenseless person, capable of lying and manipulating, capable of hiding cold cruelty behind a beautiful smile. When everything was over and the apartment was silent again, Robert and Mrs. Helen stood there in the living room, not knowing exactly what to do or say. The trauma was too deep, the betrayal too complex, the pain too great to be processed immediately. It was Robert who broke the silence. "I'll make just some tea. And then, Mum, you're going to tell me everything, without fear, without shame. I need to know exactly what happened so I can help you recover." Mrs. Helen nodded, exhausted, but at the same time feeling something she hadn't felt in weeks: relief. It wasn't peace yet, it wasn't happiness, but it was the first step towards freedom. She had been seen, she had been believed, she had been saved. And as Robert prepared the tea in the kitchen, Mrs. Helen looked out the window at the illuminated city outside. The nightmare wasn't completely over. There was still much ahead: legal processes, therapy, recovery. But for the first time in months she allowed a small glimmer of hope to sprout in her heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, things could get better from now on. In the kitchen, Robert leaned his hands on the sink and let the tears fall. He cried for his mother, for the pain she had suffered. He cried for himself, for the blindness that had almost cost him what was most precious in his life. He cried for the marriage that had just imploded, revealing itself to be built on lies and appearances. But, most importantly, he cried with relief for having discovered in time before something worse happened. When he returned to the living room with 2 cups of chamomile tea, he found his mother still looking out the window. He sat beside her and silently offered one of the cups. They stayed like that for a long time, mother and son, drinking tea in silence, beginning the long process of healing wounds that went far beyond the visible marks on Mrs. Helen's arms. That night marked the end of a terrible chapter and the beginning of another, uncertain but necessary. The road ahead would be difficult, full of challenges and obstacles, but now they would face it together as it should have been all along. The first few days after that night were a whirlwind of confused emotions. Mrs. Helen would wake up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, thinking she heard Christina's footsteps in the corridor. It took a few seconds to remember that she was safe now, that Christina wouldn't return, that the nightmare was over. But the fear, that deep-seated fear that had settled in every cell of her body, did not disappear so easily. Robert took a week off work to care for his mother. He slept on the sofa for the first few nights, wanting to be nearby if she needed anything. He hired a cleaning company to do a thorough cleaning of the apartment, as if he could also cleanse the bad memories that inhabited those walls. He moved some furniture around, bought fresh flowers, and opened all the windows to let the air circulate. Nora returned the following Monday, as always, but found a completely different house. Robert greeted her at the door with a tight hug. "Thank you, Nora, thank you, for having the courage I didn't have. Thank you for saving my mother." Nora had tears in her eyes. "I just did what any decent person would do, Dr. Robert. Mrs. Helen didn't deserve to go through that." In the following days, Robert talked at length with his mother. She recounted everything, from the first subtle signs to the most serious episodes. Each word was difficult, each memory painful to relive. But Robert listened with infinite patience, holding his mother's hand, letting her express herself at her own pace. It was during one of these conversations that Robert suggested therapy. "Mum, I think it would be important for you to talk to a professional, someone who understands these things, who can help you process everything that happened." Mrs. Helen hesitated. "Son, therapy is for people with problems in their heads. I'm not crazy." "No one is saying you're crazy, Mum, but you went through a very difficult, traumatic situation. Getting professional help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of courage. It's taking care of yourself." After much discussion and encouragement, Mrs. Helen agreed. Robert scheduled an appointment with a psychologist specializing in trauma and domestic violence, Dr. Marianne, a woman in her 50s with short grey hair, kind eyes, and a calm voice. The first session was difficult. Mrs. Helen arrived tense, sitting on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped in her lap. Dr. Marianne started slowly, asking simple questions, letting the patient get used to the environment, to the process. "You don't have to tell me everything today, Mrs. Helen. We'll go at your pace. This is a safe space where you can say whatever you want, without judgment." Gradually, session after session, Mrs. Helen began to open up. She talked about her life. Before, about how she raised Robert alone, about the sacrifices she had made. She talked about the joy of being invited to live with her son and the disappointment that followed. She talked about the fear, about the shame, about the feeling of having become invisible. In one of the sessions, Dr. Marianne said something that changed Mrs. Helen's perspective. "You know that none of this was your fault, don't you? Many victims of abuse carry guilt, thinking they could have done something different, that they caused it somehow. But the truth is simple. The only one to blame is the person who chose to be violent." "But I could have talked to Robert sooner. I could have asked for help," Mrs. Helen replied, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, you could have. But fear is paralyzing, Mrs. Helen, and this paralysis is part of the abuse cycle. The abuser creates such an environment of terror that the victim loses the ability to react. This is not the victim's fault. It is a deliberate strategy of the abuser." Those words were like balm to Mrs. Helen's wounded soul. For the first time, she began to understand that she had not been weak or cowardly. She had been a victim of a situation elaborately constructed to throw her off balance, to break her resistance, to make her believe there was no way out. Meanwhile, the legal process ran its course. Christina hired an expensive lawyer who tried to build a defense based on misunderstandings and the victim's memory problems, but the evidence was too strong. The photographs of the injuries, Nora's testimony, Robert's account, all built a solid case. The hearing was scheduled for 3 months after that night. Mrs. Helen was nervous, afraid to see Christina again, afraid she wouldn't be able to speak, that she would freeze up. But Dr. Marianne prepared her, doing breathing exercises, working on strategies to deal with anxiety. Robert would be by her side the whole time, as would Nora, who made a point of being present to provide support. On the day of the hearing, Mrs. Helen woke up early. She wore a simple but dignified outfit, a navy blue dress Robert had bought for her, comfortable low heels. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a different woman from months ago. There were still marks of suffering, yes, but there was also something new shining in her eyes. Determination. The courtroom was an intimidating place with high ceilings, dark wood, a formality that made Mrs. Helen feel small. But when Robert held her hand and Nora smiled encouragingly from the other side, she took a deep breath and remembered Dr. Marianne's words. Your voice matters, your story matters, your pain matters. Christina entered the room accompanied by her lawyer, dressed conservatively with discreet makeup, a calculated image of respectability. When her eyes met Mrs. Helen's, there was a mixture of anger and contempt that made the elderly woman instinctively shrink back. But then Robert squeezed her hand and she remembered she was no longer alone. The judge entered, everyone stood, and the hearing began. The prosecutor presented the case, detailing the aggressions, showing photographs of the injuries, calling witnesses. Nora was the first to testify, recounting in a firm voice everything she had witnessed, the changes she had observed in Mrs. Helen, the signs of abuse that had accumulated. Christina's lawyer tried to discredit the testimony, suggesting that Nora had personal motives for inventing stories, that perhaps she wanted to harm her employer. But Nora was not shaken. I have worked in that house for 5 years. I never had problems with Mrs. Christina until she started to mistreat Mrs. Helen. I have no reason to lie. I am just telling the truth. Then it was Robert's turn to testify. He recounted finding the note, seeing the marks on his mother's arms and confronting Christina. His voice trembled with emotion as he recalled those moments, but he did not falter in any detail. Finally, it was Mrs. Helen's turn to speak. She stood up on trembling legs, walked to the front and took the oath to tell the truth. The prosecutor began by asking gentle questions, giving her time to adjust. Can you tell us in your own words what happened? Mrs. Helen looked at the judge, then at Robert, who nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice was low at first, but it gained strength as the words flowed. She told of her arrival full of hope, of the first happy weeks, of the gradual change in Christina's behavior. She told of the increasingly absurd rules, of the growing control, of the fear that had settled in. When she reached the part about the physical assaults, her voice faltered. Tears streamed freely. But she continued because she had to, because all the other women who suffered in silence deserved her courage to speak. She would squeeze my arm tightly when she got annoyed. She said that if I told Robert, no one would believe me. She said I was old, confused, that I was losing my mind. I started believing it. I started fading away, until I almost disappeared. Christina's lawyer tried to cross-examine, suggesting that perhaps Mrs. Helen was confusing things, that perhaps she had age-related memory problems. But Mrs. Helen looked him in the eyes and said with a firmness that surprised even herself, I am not confused. I know exactly what happened to me, and I know I didn't deserve it. Christina was called to testify. She maintained her composure, denied the accusations, said that Mrs. Helen was difficult to deal with, that she had tried to be patient but sometimes needed to be firm. When the prosecutor showed the photographs of the injuries and asked how she explained them, she said that her mother-in-law injured herself, that she had frequent falls. But the judge was not foolish. He had enough experience to recognize patterns of domestic violence, to see through well-constructed lies. When it was time for his decision, he looked directly at Christina. You tried to build a defense based on discrediting the victim, on making it seem like she was the problem. But the evidence is clear. The marks on Mrs. Helen's arms are not from accidental falls. They are from deliberate assaults. Her testimony is consistent, corroborated by witnesses. And your attitude during this hearing only reinforces the pattern of manipulative behavior that characterizes domestic abusers. He paused, consulted his notes, then continued. Christina was found guilty and convicted of mistreatment. The sentence included a restraining order against Mrs. Helen, community service, and mandatory psychological counseling. It was not a severe sentence in terms of time, but it was the official recognition that a crime had been committed, that Mrs. Helen was right, that her pain was real and valid. When they left the courthouse, Mrs. Helen felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Robert hugged her right there on the sidewalk, not caring about the people passing by. "It's over, Mum, it's really over now." But Mrs. Helen knew it wasn't completely over. The judicial process had ended, yes, but the healing process was just beginning. She still had nightmares, still startled at sudden noises, still felt that tightness in her chest when she saw tall blonde women on the street. The trauma would not disappear overnight. It was Dr. Marianne who suggested support groups. There's an organization here in London that works with women who are victims of domestic violence. They have support groups that meet weekly. I think it would be very good for you to meet other women who have gone through similar situations. Mrs. Helen hesitated at first. The idea of talking about her experience to strangers frightened her, but Dr. Marianne gently insisted, and Robert encouraged her. Finally, she agreed to at least visit a meeting. The group met in a simple room of an NGO in the Islington Borough every Thursday evening. There were chairs arranged in a circle, coffee and biscuits on a small table in the corner, posters on the walls with emergency numbers and messages of support. When Mrs. Helen entered for the first time, accompanied by Robert, who would wait outside, she felt the eyes of all the women. Present turned to her. The group coordinator, a social worker named Felicity, greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome. This is a safe space where all of us share our stories and support each other. You don't have to speak if you don't want to. You can just listen today if you prefer." Mrs. Helen sat in one of the chairs and observed. There were women of all ages there, from different social backgrounds, each carrying their own scars, their own stories of survival. A young woman in her 20s spoke about her ex-boyfriend who controlled her through her phone. A middle-aged woman told about her husband, who had psychologically humiliated her for years. An elderly lady, not much younger than Mrs. Helen, shared her experience with a son who took financial advantage of her. When her turn came, Mrs. Helen surprised herself by beginning to speak. Her voice was trembling at first, but it gained strength as the words flowed. She told her story, not all the details, but enough. And when she finished, she saw tears in the eyes of several women, saw expressions of recognition, of empathy, of solidarity. One of the women, named Teresa, spoke after. We always think it only happens to others, that we should have been stronger, smarter, but the truth is that anyone can be a victim of abuse, and there's no shame in admitting it. The shame belongs to the abuser, not the victim. Those words resonated deeply with Mrs. Helen. She returned the following week and the next and the next. Gradually, the group became an essential part of her recovery. There, she didn't need to explain, didn't need to justify herself. Everyone understood, because everyone had gone through something similar. Over time, Mrs. Helen not only received support, but began to offer it as well. When a new woman arrived, scared and ashamed, it was Mrs. Helen who approached first, held her hand, and said in a firm voice, "You are not alone, and it was not your fault." At home, life gradually returned to a new normal. Robert hired an interior designer to help transform the apartment, making it less like the place where the trauma had happened. They painted the walls in lighter, brighter colors, rearranged the furniture, and bought new plants for the balcony. Mrs. Helen started cooking again, this time without fear of using the kitchen as she pleased. Robert would come home from work and find the house smelling of cornmeal cake, homemade bread, all those recipes she hadn't made during the months of nightmare. They had dinner together every night, talking about their day, about plans for the future, about nothing and about everything. Nora continued working there, but now the dynamic was completely different. She and Mrs. Helen developed a genuine friendship, had coffee together in the morning, talked about life and laughed at silly things. Nora watched Mrs. Helen's transformation with pride, knowing she had done the right thing. That day she decided to act. Robert also went to therapy. He needed to process the guilt he felt for not having noticed his mother's suffering sooner, for the misguided choice he had made in marrying Christina, for having been so blind. He learned that loving someone doesn't mean closing your eyes to their flaws, that caring for someone means being truly present, not just physically, but emotionally. 6 months after that revealing night, Mrs. Helen was unrecognizable. Not physically, although the marks on her arms had completely healed, but internally. There was a strength in her now, a regained dignity, a voice that no longer remained silent. It was at one of these support group meetings that Felicity, the coordinator, made a proposal. "Mrs. Helen, you have a very powerful story. Have you ever thought about sharing it more widely? We sometimes hold public events, lectures on domestic violence. I think your testimony could help a lot of people." Mrs. Helen was thoughtful. The idea of speaking publicly scared her, but at the same time, she felt that it might be the next step in her journey. She agreed, and 2 weeks later, she was in a small auditorium in front of about 50 people, mostly women, telling her story. When she got to the part about how she finally had the courage to write that note, her voice trembled but did not break. When she spoke about seeing Robert discover the truth, tears came but did not stop her from continuing. And when she reached the end, when she spoke about recovery and hope, her voice was firm as a rock. "I believed silence would protect me," she said, looking at the audience. "But it almost destroyed me. Fear is not the fault of the one who suffers. It is the fault of the one who silences another. And I am here today to say, do not be silent. Speak, scream, ask for help, because you deserve to be heard, you deserve to be believed, you deserve to live with dignity." The audience rose in applause. Mrs. Helen saw tears on many faces, saw expressions of recognition, gratitude. After the lecture, several women approached to thank her, to share their own stories, to ask for advice. And Mrs. Helen, who months ago could barely find her own voice, was there offering strength and hope to other women. Robert watched. Everything from a corner of the room, pride overflowing from his chest. That was his mother, the warrior woman he had always known her to be, but who had been temporarily erased by trauma. Now she was back, stronger than ever. That night, when they returned home, they sat on the balcony with cups of tea, looking at the city lights. "Son, thank you," Mrs. Helen said suddenly. "For what, Mum?" "For believing in me, for saving me, for giving me the chance to find myself again." Robert took his mother's hand. "You saved yourself, Mum. I just opened the door, but you were the one who had the courage to walk through it." They sat there in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The journey had been long and painful, but it had been worth it. Mrs. Helen had passed through the darkest valley and emerged on the other side, not just alive, but truly living. Months turned into a year. Mrs. Helen continued to participate in the support group, now not just as a member, but as one of the facilitators. She continued giving lectures, sharing her story, helping other women find their own voice. She became a volunteer at the NGO, helping to organize events, raise funds, and make a difference. At home, life had found a healthy and happy rhythm. Robert was dating a new woman, Patricia, a kind and genuine literature teacher who treated Mrs. Helen with true respect and affection. There was no competition, no jealousy, just a harmonious coexistence between 3 adults who respected each other mutually. Mrs. Helen resumed her hobbies. She enrolled in a craft course at the local church, made new friends, and started embroidering again as she did when she was young. Her room was now full of life. With plants she tended herself, photos of happy moments, small craft projects scattered across the table. The old portable radio that was once a source of tension now freely played her favorite songs. Mrs. Helen cooked when she wanted, received visitors when she wanted, went out when she wanted. She had recovered not only her voice, but her autonomy, her dignity, her own life. One Sunday afternoon, almost 2 years after that night that changed everything, Mrs. Helen was in the building's communal garden, watering the rose bushes she had planted herself. Robert came down to call her for lunch and found her there in a straw hat, gardening gloves, smiling at the flowers as if they were old friends. "Mum, lunch is ready. Patricia made that lasagna you love." Mrs. Helen took off her gloves and walked beside her son back to the elevator. As they went up, Robert observed her reflection in the mirror. She was different from the frightened woman who had arrived there years ago, but also different from the broken woman who had almost been destroyed by abuse. She was a new version of herself, forged in the fire of suffering but tempered by the courage of recovery. "You know, Mum, I was thinking," Robert said as they entered the apartment, "you could write a book. Your story, your journey. I think it could help a lot of people." Mrs. Helen smiled, considering the idea. "Perhaps, my son. Perhaps someday. But for now, I'm happy living one day at a time, enjoying every moment of peace I've earned." And it was true. Mrs. Helen had learned that recovery was not a straight line, not a final destination to be reached and done with. It was a continuous process, with good days and difficult days, with moments of strength and moments of vulnerability. But she was alive, she was free, and she was living fully. And that, after everything she had been through, was more than enough. It was everything.